Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Simon from Salesforce Ben, and as always, I'll be your host for today's session, where we'll be discussing how to keep integration costs down and make connecting Salesforce to your back office easier than ever. As many of you know, streamlining Salesforce workflows and bridging the gap between customer-facing teams and the rest of the business can be a major challenge. Inefficient processes, siloed data, and manual workarounds often stand in the way of creating a seamless customer experience. In today's discussion, we're joined by Alyssa, Senior Director of Internal Systems at Keepit, and Marc, CEO of Unito. With years of experience in Salesforce and integration strategies, they'll walk us through the key challenges businesses face in this area and share actionable tips to reduce errors, improve visibility, and build scalable systems that unlock new competitive advantages. So to kick off the discussion, I'll hand it over to Marc.
Thank you, Saima. Nice to see you, Alyssa, and excited to be here. I think we should start with a quick background, a little bit of intro. Alyssa, why don't you give us a little bit of your backstory here as a Salesforce expert?
Of course. So hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Lefebvre. I'm the Senior Director of Internal Systems at Keepit. And I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem for coming up to 10 years in January next year. And I've worked across multiple different ISVs, consultancies, end users, which is where I'm at now. And I'm really excited to talk about this integration topic because it's something that, affects a lot of Salesforce admins and myself in my day-to-day life. So yeah, let's get into it.
Awesome. Marc here, so one of the co-founders at Unito. And if you haven't heard of Unito before, it's an integration platform that took a really different approach to integration. And we'll touch on that today, but the company's been around for almost 10 years now. So I've had a chance to see pretty much every flavor of integration use case out there. And as you can say, I have no hair to prove it. So let's dive in. We've got a few slides here. This will be a conversational with Alyssa and share a lot of our stories. Hopefully that's valuable for all of you. So I think we already covered this intro. Let me skip over. So let's start about costs here. Integration has a lot of benefits. We'll talk about it, but also has a lot of costs. Maybe I'll start a bit from my perspective. This is why we started Unito in the first place. It's always been extremely frustrating to build integrations because either way you go, you're always going to have a really big price to pay. Either you're paying for a custom integration, then you pay to maintain it, and then you pay to modify it, and then you pay to unbreak it when it breaks, or you're paying with your own time by doing the integration kind of manually, which, aka copy pasting, which is actually what we hear a lot of the time when customers come to us. They're still doing that manual work. Or third option, you just don't integrate and then you make the customer pay because that means your experience that you're going to provide the customer is just slower or lacks information, or customers have to repeat themselves, or you're delivering more slowly. And that's putting the cost back onto the customer. And that's the source of frustration. You buy software because there's this ROI to it, there's value, but this integration bit is this massive hidden cost of most software that often kills its ROI, the return on the investment of all of those softwares. Alyssa, I know we shared a few of those stories before. Where have you seen the costs, in your history, the hidden cost of integration?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, not only does it cost, like you said, resources, time, the customer experience, which all add up to revenue, like lost revenue. It can also cost your admin sanity in some cases. Because integrations not working can be a source of major frustration, like you said, not only for the customer, but for the internal resources that are having to manage the systems, especially when you're managing, 10, 12, 10, 15, 20 systems in a company, like I do. And when they're not, when the integrations don't work, it can be a real challenge. But ultimately we don't want our customers to suffer. And so, yeah, it definitely costs the customer.
I think there's this other option, right, to integration, which is to force everyone on the same platform as well. And I'm sure you've heard these before. I call them the religious wars, like the tool wars. And it always starts with like, I think things would be a lot easier if everybody, was on my favorite app. And I'm sure that would be Salesforce for a lot of people here. But like then we'd have a single source of truth, for everybody. How many of those religious wars have you gone into, Alyssa?
Oh, definitely many of those wars. But I think it's really interesting because you can have internally within a company, various different teams have those sort of tools that they live by, right? So, in sales, revenue operations, yeah, Salesforce, is always going to be, or not always, but, in my experience, it's always been sort of the tool that everyone uses. But then you have other teams that are using Jira, the whole Atlassian suite. You've got teams using other tools, Asana for tasks, all of these other tools that, they're using it as their one source of truth. And not everybody, should be on Salesforce, in the whole company sometimes. So there are instances where you do need other tools outside of Salesforce, but you need that integration between everything to make sure you do have a single source of truth, which has to come from somewhere, but you do need to have the integrations in all those systems.
Yeah, it's a good segue into this this slide here. Salesforce is a pretty broad platform, right? It's like infinitely customizable with all the custom fields, objects, the workflows. How often have you seen attempts at using Salesforce in the back office, right, for more than its usual use case?
Yeah, I haven't experienced it in terms of actually trying to replace a back office, which I think is a good thing because it's not, that's not really what it's there for, right? Salesforce is supposed to be your front end. It has your sales information, service, obviously Service Cloud is a big one as well, but
Yeah.
it's there to hold that information. It's not there to be your back office. It does need back office information in certain cases, right? You do need to know when invoices have been paid and things like that, but it cannot operate as the back office. Like there's a reason why ERPs, exist.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think exactly like you're talking about, it is the front office mechanism. It's not that back office tool.
Yeah, let's dive in a little bit into what we see. These are the typical categories of software that we see in the back office. And on the front side, you'll see a lot of things around the CRM. And obviously these platforms have brought in with the marketing cloud and the service cloud and things like that. We call this the Great Wall because in every org, every day, people just throw things over that wall and kind of hope for the best, right? It's like it could be a bug report or request for a legal review or demo of a product, send a message, fill a form, some intake form somewhere, and put something on an agenda in a meeting, and then you walk away and you don't really have any more visibility across the divide, and you just hope that things happen. And it creates this siloing, but putting one system to replace them all, as you said, is kind of impossible. So let's dive into a real life examples or different use cases that we see. And we've picked these from some of our most common kind of customer stories here. And we see these really all the time. Maybe Alyssa, you'll have some more personal stories on these, but let me kind of do a quick lay of the land here. So we've got marketing often using a project management tool like Asana here. We've got a legal security team using another work management tool. In this case, we have a ClickUp as an example. We have an engineering team doing implementation projects in Jira because they might be technically focused. We'll have a ServiceNow here, which is used by the internal IT company, a group, or the infrastructure group. So anytime there might be an incident that needs to be sent, that is the compliance tool that tracks all of those incidents and the change management. We'll have a financial system like a NetSuite where all the invoicing and the customer system records are as well. And sometimes there's even an external team or company for the payment collection, which will be, I need to follow up with all these people to track down some money here. So these are all places where there's use cases that overlap with what's happening in the customer facing side. Do you have any stories here of the ones that you've seen the most common or that you would add here?
Yeah. I mean, Salesforce integration with a NetSuite or an SAP or an Oracle from an ERP perspective is the one I've seen the most common. It happens almost everywhere, but absolutely utilizing something like Jira for project implementation and being able to kick off things. You have an opportunity that's closed won. and that, starts off the implementation of a project, having that seamless integration between the two. And then also equally for the salesperson to understand where is this implementation at with that bi-directional sync that you're talking about is so critical, because sales reps, oftentimes the deal closes and that's it. It's like they're sort of, they're not like they're no longer involved, but a lot of times they do want to know what's happening. They do want to know where the implementation is at. How's that customer getting on? Are they happy? And they do want to keep an eye on that. But if they don't have that information in Salesforce or where they work, that it can be, they're chasing up people on email, Slack, Teams, and you don't have a single source of truth, which is of course what we want.
Yeah, and we have a case study that's this exact example a little bit later on. But I think this two-way or these two-way arrows here are pretty important here, because those use cases are actually quite collaborative. And I think this is the gotcha that happens a lot. It's not just, again, throwing something over the wall. The deal's closed. You guys are now in charge of the implementation. There's often questions that have to come back. The customer still has points of contact with the customer-facing person, and that's the person they're going to go to when they have a question or a problem. And the more technical teams might not be in contact with the customers. So they might need to go to that person to answer questions. So it's this back and forth that happens, and it's the wall is really getting in the way here to this kind of collaborative use case. So this is, like you said, this is where a lot of companies will turn to integration, because that friction between those systems is high and super expensive. So they look to integrate those systems. And this is what my marketing team would like me to tell you in terms of the benefits. But let's skip to an actual customer story here. So, what are the benefits once you connect these systems? We kind of touch on those. This is for one of our case studies with one of our customers called CloudWorks. They are a full service consulting company firm they do enterprise cloud technology. So they're a Google Premier partner. And again, the sales team lives in Salesforce, and they have delivery teams that are mostly engineer or technically minded, because it's all very much Google Cloud stuff. And they were initially living in ClickUp for delivering those statements of work, triggering a statement of work and delivering it. And then they eventually moved to Jira. And again, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but all those projects being very technical and engineering heavy, the account manager in Salesforce really needed to stay close to the progress, because on both sides, they're very technical, and even the account manager stays quite technical. So again, keeping the customer up to date without having to distract the engineering teams and, hey, where you at, which is probably something I've seen, at least our engineers really, really hate when we do that. And that was the key of setting up an integration between them. They're syncing over 25 fields of information back and forth between the systems. So a lot of customer and deal information going, to inform the delivery teams, but also the project status, the expected milestone dates, and the progress, those coming back, and the back and forth in comments and discussions, which is, like I said, one of the really key points. Instead of having those conversations in a separate system, right, in Slack or in email or in meetings, everything stays close to the work, right? And you can see some of the time savings and cost savings here on the right, but it's basically one full-time person's worth of time just doing manual work that they saved. Yeah.
And I think it's what. Oh, sorry, Mark.
Go ahead, Alyssa. Go ahead.
Just one of those things where it's not so much about even just the time, like the specific time that it would have taken someone to answer. It's about the time that you interrupt someone in the middle of their work. They come out of sort of their zone of focus. They then have to get back in the zone. And so it's like, it's not even just the moment or the couple of minutes that you spend answering the question or going to look at the information and then answering the question. It's everything across, people getting out of their sync. They then have to go, maybe they get distracted with something else. Then they come back. So it delays everything when people don't have access to the information that they need. And talking about saving costs, I'm sure it's not worthwhile having, all of the development people have access and licenses to Salesforce, and equally all the salespeople having, access and licenses to either ClickUp and or Jira. because that's just a complete, duplication of licensing. And when we're talking about keeping integration costs down, people can have their license for the system that they need to work in, and then consume the information that they need from other systems. So I'm sure that saves a ton of money as well.
Those Salesforce licenses are pretty expensive if you need all your engineers to have access to it.
Yeah, tell me about it.
And it somehow doesn't quite feel familiar for engineers in Salesforce and for reps in Jira, for that, because they really weren't designed for that. I think there's one other element for this customer, which will lead us nicely to the next conversation, which is they actually migrated from ClickUp to Jira along the way. And if you've ever built integrations before, like migrating tools that are already integrating, that's like a whole massive endeavor, right? It's bane of integration projects, because it just took you, 3 months or months to integrate Salesforce to ClickUp, and then you're moving to Jira's, and that's going to cost you how many more months? And you're going to have to redo it all. So are you going to do it? Are you going to adopt a better technology for your team? Or are you going to refrain from it because the integration, costs would have to be repaid? And that's a huge challenge for integration. It kind of locks you into your situation and your workflows, and you can't evolve very easily. Which we've got another Office reference here coming up. Leads us to the horror stories, because to be frank, they're everywhere, and we hear them all the time. And we'd love to hear from the audience here, if you could just type into the chat which of those 1, 2, 3, 4 common situations or horror stories have you hit the most with integrations? Cost overruns, slower projects, too slow, too complex, or just didn't solve the actual need in the first place. And maybe while people are punching this, Alyssa, do you have a horror story that you could share?
Oh, for sure. I mean, in my role, I've seen all of these things happen. So, if I was answering in the comments, I'd be putting these in order of the most critical ones. I think the complexity, that is one that often comes to mind. And it's not so much about the complexity on the build side, which obviously it is, but it's also about the complexity of maintaining it. You don't have someone, I'm a Salesforce admin, right? I've been in the ecosystem for 10 years. I've got a decent amount of knowledge. I cannot code, right? I cannot code. I can read code a little bit. I can copy and paste here and there, but I wouldn't be able to fix an integration that was failing without a developer. If I had a sort of a traditional integration. So I think, from my perspective, something that is always top of mind is the administration side of things. Making things that are complex into something that's not so complex. And I think, didn't meet expectations can also be one, because I think when people think that, okay, this is fully integrated, but actually it's not fully integrated. It's either, a one-way sync, or the integration is not working as expected. And I can see, people are posting their comments in the chat now. We have Jordan saying 2 and 4, which absolutely, is like I just said, for both of those. A lot of people are saying 2 delayed timelines. I've experienced that myself as well. So I think, we're getting a really good mix of reasons, but I think it just shows that integration has horror stories, and there's definitely a need to simplify that.
Cool. And this is the last Office reference in our slides, I promise. So we talked about this. Traditional integration approaches, they're really expensive, they're complex, and they're slow to roll. I think they're slow to roll out, and seems to fit with a lot of what people I've seen in their histories here. And by traditional integrations, I do mean things like custom coding integrations, but also a lot of what we see with the iPaaS, or integration platforms as a service. They all use this, if this, then that kind of model of integrations. And it's very focused on automations, which is great if you're throwing things over the wall. If an opportunity gets closed, create this, invoice on the other side. But again, that's where it stops. It doesn't actually go back and forth. And that really hurts that collaborative aspect that we talked about. So today, we really wanted to introduce you to a different approach. it is really based on this notion of live two-way sync of data. And this animation here kind of illustrates a Salesforce customer being able to escalate a case to an engineering team or service team that is using Jira Service Management in this case. So there's some kind of error that the customer is reporting, and it's been identified that this should be solved by someone internal. And so the case kind of transforms into an issue or a ticket inside of Jira. And that's the throw it over the wall part, right? That's the part that the automation, that's the easy part if you want. But the sync approach here really continues there. That's where the magic starts shining as someone gets assigned and the status changes and the dates change and there's a conversation. Both systems keep in sync, right? The information flows back and forth. So you can really have a collaboration of two people inside the org that live on both sides of that wall. And it feels like everyone's in their tool, but obviously they're not, right? The integration is making that magic happen here. So, we're obviously pretty bullish about this at Unito since we build, a product an integration platform that does this out of the box. But the key takeaway kind of today is if you stop thinking of integrations as the usual triggers and action approach that you might have seen in things like Zapier or MuleSoft, if you've been lucky enough to use it inside of the Salesforce ecosystem, those platforms have gotten us used to that automation. If you start thinking about the sync as another paradigm, you're going to see the power that comes out of it. And it'll drop the complexity drastically and the cost of integrations as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. I can see, or I can think of a use case that I actually had today where we had to update, that invoices had been paid in our financial system, that we had to manually update that in Salesforce today because it's part of our commission structure. So it's one of those things where there's, every person on this call can probably think of 10, 15, 20 or more integration stories where it's things like I need to update that an invoice was paid, or I need to update the status of, I don't know, a contract, a case, anything like that, a subscription, right? If a customer terminates something and that's done through another tool, you need to update that in Salesforce. So there's so many scenarios where this two-way sync is so critical. And I'm sure everybody on the call, is thinking about all their use cases.
I can imagine the sales rep was like, I'm only getting comped on this if it's actually paid. And so pinging the financial team, is it paid? Is it paid? Is it paid? Is it paid?
100%. That's literally, that is the use case. And I think that's probably the use case in a lot of companies. And Salesforce, of course, doesn't have that information. So absolutely, there's loads of use cases like that.
Yeah, that's painfully awesome. All right, let me just try to breeze through some of this stuff so we have time for questions. What are the characteristics that you should be looking for in terms of an integration platform that supports the sync approach? One is look for something that is very configurable, but yet really no code. And I would refer to Salesforce as a really good example of a platform where you could do a lot without no code. But the moment you write one line of code is the moment you're taking this debt in your company that you can never really fully repay. The second aspect is look for things that are platforms that offer really two-way out of the box, because a lot of the platforms say, oh yeah, you could just add rules in the other way. If you create a ticket, an opportunity there, create a ticket, and then if the ticket gets submitted. But like if you actually try to do that, it gets really messy fast. So if ever you have these projects, start with the two-way. Don't make it milestone 2, 3 of the project, because the reality is you probably won't be able to do it with most of the traditional platforms. And then the last bit is make sure it's extensible so that you can extend the platform to support any of your tools that you have internally. And it gives you the flexibility to change and adapt to new technologies that come. Right. That's going to give you the best combination of the low cost of integration and the autonomy of your teams to really evolve the integrations as their work evolves, as their own workflows and practice evolve. Let me quickly show you how some of these things are reflected inside a platform like Unito, just to give you a sense of the core capabilities you should be looking for. This is a field mapping for a two-way sync between, again, Salesforce opportunities and an implementation project in Jira, just to stay in the same theme. So the mapping allows you to say which fields in the information do you want to sync across, which which fields should sync one way, which fields sync two-way, and gives you that control, that granular control. But it also allows you to do pretty sophisticated things with very simple mapping. So if you're mapping a description, does it support rich text? Can you put formatting and bullets in the opportunity notes, for example? And can you, the developer that's going to see it in terms of looking at an SOW brief, will they have that rich text? Can you sync attachments? So if you've got a ticket you're escalating, will the attachments of the customer screenshot actually carry over? Can you do multiple value mapping? So if you've got a status, multiple statuses in Jira that don't match your statuses in Salesforce because you're organized differently, can you map those together? Can you map the workflows together? Well, can you detect that users are the same and automatically map them across? Can you do comments and hierarchies? Because these are pretty challenging things to implement in most of the integration platforms, but they are absolutely table stakes for two integrations if you want to work across the wall, if you want to actually take the wall down. So again, very simple approach to add mappings and letting the admins do this themselves without having to talk to a developer and evolve themselves. That is a huge unlock. I know, Alyssa, you had this one guy, you're one poor guy in charge of that one integration built in-house that you kept pestering, that you were telling me about.
Yes. I won't say his name on the call, but
Okay.
yes, he was, I felt so bad. It was constant, hey, this integration's not working. Hey, is this been updated in SAP? Constantly having to check because we were getting, information from the finance team saying, this customer information hasn't been integrated or hasn't been pushed over. And this happens, I'm sure, with every Salesforce admin that's had to deal with, a custom built integration. And it's one of those things that you sort of expect the integration to work. And when it doesn't, you lose trust with the systems. And that's a big thing. Your users need to be able to trust the data that's in your systems, because when they don't, they'll automatically mistrust things. So they're still going to go and bother people and say, hey, is this showing correctly? Are you seeing the same thing? And it defeats the whole purpose of the integration to begin with. So yeah, what I love about what you've talked about here is just the fact that it's fully configurable with no code, because for me, that's the biggest challenge, is when I can't fix something myself, or I don't have the option to even go in and look. A lot of times integrations from in my role have been a black box. I don't even get involved in them because they're just so complex. So I think that's a big thing for admins. I think that's where, a lot of technology is moving, is away from this, very heavy technical side of things to low code, no code. And that's great for people like me who aren't super technical, but who understand the data, the architecture between the systems. And what I love about this, especially this screenshot, is just showing how you can have that bidirectional sync, which is super critical, but sometimes you do only want a one-way sync between one system and another. And I love that that's possible here as well.
Awesome. We're coming out of time, and I want to keep time for questions. So if you have questions, drop them in the chat. They take a little bit of time for us to show up, so we'll have time to accumulate them. I'm going to skip this other screen. If you'd like obviously a full demo of Unito, you can book one on our website on unito.io. But the quick recap are these are the keys to lowering those costs on the integration side. You want to leverage a platform. You want to avoid building custom. You want a platform that's no code, that's very configurable, just like Alyssa mentioned, that does two-way out of the box, because that's essential. And that gives you the ability to be extensible and scale with your needs. On that, I will turn to the chat. Alyssa, have you been keeping an eye? Do you think there's any questions to surface here?
We've got one from Erica K. It looks like she's watching on YouTube. And we've got it here on the screen. So what is the time and financial savings from the field mapping portion?
So the time savings, I mean, if you were to implement that in code, it would take you, weeks of development to do those. So with a few of those clicks, you're doing that right out of the box. I think the biggest saving, though, is the ability to iterate. So if on one side, let's say, so the change management of things, and this is key. If you've got a team in Salesforce that's organized one way, and they want to evolve, right? They need to change the way they work. They need to add a status or a pipeline stage. They need to be able to do that without having to consult with every other team where Salesforce is integrated with, right? So the ability to do mapping gives you that flexibility to change one side without having to impact the others. You could just go and update your mapping. And specifically in Unito, when you do that and you save your flow settings, it'll ask you, do you want to apply this new mapping retroactively on all of your historical data, or do you want to apply it only on the future ones? So that gives you the ability to change the way you work and do it in your team and update the integration along the way without impacting anybody else. So in terms of agility, in terms of change management, and in terms of velocity, that is a huge, huge gain. Because the opposite would be talk to the integration, talk to developers, sit down, requirements, etc. Right?
Or the opposite is like what I do sometimes, and you just break the integration by mistake because you didn't realize.
Yeah.
So don't do what I do. But absolutely, it's one of those things, I think, where when you can go in, like I said, when an admin can go in and update a mapping of fields, like let's say you add a new field and it's critical for, you know, your projects or your financial systems or something like that, you can go in, add it to the mapping, and it's set up immediately. It's not weeks of requirements gathering, weeks of, you know, development having to happen. I think that for me as an admin is incredibly important, and I'm sure other admins out there feel the same way. But it puts you back in control. It puts you in, you know, in the driver's seat rather than as a, you know, bystander or passenger having to wait for something to be done. You're in control, especially if you're working in a startup, scale up, where things are moving rapidly. I mean, that's been sort of my experience in the Salesforce ecosystem, is that, you know, people want things now, or they wanted it yesterday, and being able to actually do that and actually, you know, meet those needs at a very rapid time scale, that for me is, you know, is the biggest, I would say, sort of saving that you could get.
Awesome. Saima, do we have time for another question, or should we wrap here?
We did have a few come in. So there is one, what are some best practices for managing conflict resolution?
So conflict resolution, I'm assuming that's in terms of the integration. This is something that a platform, like what if things are edited at the same time on two systems? How does the integration handle those things, especially when it's two-way? This is something that a platform like Unito handles out of the box. Like we'll actually merge at the field level, so you won't actually get overwrites. And if someone did change, you know, the title at the same time, then it's a little bit like if two people edited the same title in Salesforce, the last one kind of updates the other one. But this gets really complicated if you're in the iPaaS or you know, a MuleSoft or a Workato world, because you can get loops and things overriding each other. So.
Great, thank you. We had another one come in here. Does Unito store any data?
So we actually don't store the customer data. We just transit it and sync it. This is a particularity. Some of the sync platforms actually replicate all of your data internally in their own data centers. So be mindful of that. But that's typically how. That means that from a security perspective, it's a lot less risky, a lot less complex, because Unito won't actually replicate the customers, you know, the data from your systems in our own infrastructure. It only transits through it.
Great, thank you. We have one more here. How does the integration adapt to Salesforce updates or API changes?
So that's one of the big benefits of leveraging an integration platform, where there is an entire team who lives and breathes integrations and maintains those connectors, right? Maintains the connectors, the integrations to Salesforce. So company like ours, we are basically plugged in to the release notes and the platform teams of all these different vendors. So we often know ahead of time. Actually, we often get consulted on API changes before they're made. So even in the case where there was an unplanned API change that breaks something, that's going to be a priority for us, because we have, you know, thousands of customers that are depending on those. So you've got basically a specialized team addressing any API change preemptively in most cases, or very, very quickly in the worst of cases. That means you don't have to wake someone up or find the person who actually implemented this integration a year ago and has moved on to another role, which is really painful. I see Alyssa nodding. It's not a good place to be.
It's not a good place to be.
Yeah.
Amazing, thank you. If there are no further questions, I am happy to wrap up the session now, if you are.
Yep. Thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Alyssa and Mark, for a super insightful conversation. And thank you, everyone in the audience as well, for joining us today, sharing your questions and also engaging throughout. If you would like to revisit the session or share it with your colleagues, you can use the LinkedIn event link or find this video on YouTube by typing in the title of this session. I will pop the link if you would like to find out more about Unito in the comments right now. Do check it out. You can also book yourself in for a demo if you'd like to see it in action. Otherwise, if you do have any further questions, then do comment below or reach out to our speakers on LinkedIn and keep the conversation going. Thank you all for joining us and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks. Bye.